On Christmas Eve, 2024, Dr. Sarah Mitchell found a German Shepherd trembling under her old pickup truck in the parking lot of her small-town clinic in Evergreen, Montana. The dog, a purebred that should have been worth thousands, was nothing but bones and fear, with scars covering his body and a look in his eyes that told of unspeakable cruelty. That night, the temperature was forecast to drop to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah had two choices: leave him to die in the blizzard, or bring him home and risk opening her heart again after 2 years of carefully building walls around it. What none of them knew yet was that this wasn't just any abandoned dog. This was a ghost from Sarah's past, a decorated war hero who had served beside her deceased husband in Afghanistan, and a key to healing 3 broken souls who had forgotten how to hope. The clock was ticking, the dog was dying, and Sarah's decision would change everything. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at the metal sink in her veterinary clinic, scrubbing blood from beneath her fingernails. At 35, she carried herself with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to keep moving because stopping meant feeling. Her dark hair, pulled back in a perpetual ponytail, showed premature threads of silver she'd stopped bothering to hide. The overhead fluorescent light flickered, had been flickering for 3 months now, but replacing it cost money she didn't have. Through the window, she could see the parking lot of Evergreen, Montana, population 2,347. The town had been her refuge 3 years ago when the weight of Virginia, of James's military friends offering condolences, of neighbors who looked at her with pity, of Emma's empty laughter in a house full of ghosts, had become unbearable. Here nobody knew her story unless she told it, and she never told it. Her clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted house on Maple Street with their living quarters above. Practical, affordable, lonely. The business barely broke even. Most months she operated at a loss, making up the difference with house calls to ranches and farms, euthanizing old horses and treating calves with pneumonia, unglamorous work that paid in cash and kept the lights on. She glanced at the calendar tacked to the wall. December 24th. Christmas Eve. Emma had asked if they could get a tree this year. Sarah had said maybe. They both knew what maybe meant. The numbers haunted her. They lived in her spiral notebook, in red ink, in columns that never balanced. Monthly income, $5,000 on a good month. Monthly expenses, $5,450. James's medical bills from his final hospitalization, the emergency surgery, the ICU, the machines that had kept him breathing for 6 days while she'd held his hand and begged him not to go, those bills added up to $47,000. She paid $200 a month toward them. At that rate, she'd be paying them off for 19 more years. The clinic mortgage was 3 months behind. The bank had been patient, but patience had limits. Emma was upstairs now, probably already asleep despite the early hour. 8 years old and far too comfortable with silence. She'd stopped asking for things around her 7th birthday, as if she'd intuited that wanting cost money and money caused her mother stress. Last week, Sarah had found a Christmas list under Emma's pillow. 3 items. 1, dog. 2, dad back. 3, mom to smile again. Sarah had cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. They'd started therapy 6 months ago, $50 a session that insurance didn't cover, but the school counselor had insisted. Emma performed wellness beautifully. She told the therapist what the therapist wanted to hear. But Sarah saw the truth in the letters Emma wrote to her dead father and hid in a shoebox under her bed. Letters that said things like, "Did you leave because I wasn't good enough?" and "I try to be quiet so Mom doesn't get more tired." Sarah dried her hands and checked her watch. 11:30. Time to lock up, go upstairs, and pretend tomorrow wouldn't come. That's when her phone rang. The voice on the phone was elderly, slightly breathless. "Sarah? It's Maggie Chen from next door. I'm sorry to call so late, but there's something under your truck. I think it's dying." Sarah grabbed her keys and coat, moving on autopilot. She'd grown accustomed to emergency calls, ranchers with colicky horses, children sobbing over injured cats. But Maggie's voice carried something different. Not panic, grief. The December wind hit her face like a slap as she stepped outside. 18 degrees below freezing, the weather app on her phone had said. A blizzard warning scrolled across the screen. The worst storm Montana had seen in a decade, expected to hit within the hour. Already, fat snowflakes spiraled down through the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Maggie stood by Sarah's old Ford pickup, hugging herself against the cold. At 72, she moved with the careful precision of someone aware of her bones' fragility, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She'd been a school principal for 30 years before retiring. Now she lived alone in the house next door, tending a garden in summer and watching the world through lace curtains in winter. "Under there," Maggie pointed. "I was taking out the trash when I heard whimpering. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I saw movement." Sarah knelt, her knees pressing into frozen concrete, and peered beneath the truck's undercarriage. In the darkness between the wheels, a pair of amber eyes caught the light. Then she saw the shape attached to those eyes, and her breath caught. A German shepherd, or what had once been a German shepherd. The dog was massive in frame but skeletal in reality, every rib visible through matted fur. Patches of hair were missing entirely, revealing skin that looked raw and scarred. One ear was torn, the edges ragged as if something or someone had damaged it violently. The dog's entire body trembled, though whether from cold or fear, Sarah couldn't tell. Probably both. "Oh God," she whispered. The dog didn't move, didn't growl or bark, just stared at her with eyes that held an intelligence she recognized immediately. This wasn't a feral animal or an abandoned pet. This was a trained dog, a working dog. Something about the way it held itself, even in terror, spoke of discipline and purpose beaten into submission by something worse than training. Sarah had seen abuse before. Working in rural Montana, you saw things people did to animals when they thought no one was watching. But this was different. This was systematic, deliberate. The scars on the dog's back formed a crosshatch pattern she recognized from veterinary journals. Cattle prod burns. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, keeping her voice low and even. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's trembling increased. Its eyes darted between Sarah and the open space beyond the parking lot as if calculating escape routes, but it didn't move. Too weak, Sarah realized, or too resigned. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it to get a better look without shining it directly in the dog's eyes. Male, she noted. Neutered. Probably 4 or 5 years old based on what she could see of his teeth. His paws were bleeding. He'd traveled far on frozen ground. Snow had already begun to accumulate in his fur, tiny white crystals that would turn to ice if he stayed out here much longer. "Maggie, can you get some food from the clinic? Whatever's in the refrigerator, turkey, if there's any left from lunch, and a blanket." Maggie hurried off. Sarah lay down on her stomach on the frozen concrete, parallel to the dog, making herself less threatening. The cold seeped through her coat immediately, numbing her chest and arms, but she didn't move. "You're safe now," she murmured. "I know someone hurt you. I know you have every reason not to trust me. But I swear on my daughter's life I will never hurt you. Never." The dog's eyes blinked slowly. Watching. Evaluating. Sarah kept talking, her voice barely above a whisper. She talked about nothing important. The weather, the clinic, how much she hated the fluorescent light that flickered. Anything to fill the silence with something that wasn't threatening. This was the veterinarian's art that couldn't be taught in school. Patience. the ability to sit in another creature's terror and not rush it. Maggie returned with turkey slices and an old wool blanket. Sarah took the turkey and placed a piece on the ground, an arm's length from the dog. Then she slid backward, giving him space. The dog didn't move toward the food. His eyes stayed locked on Sarah. "It's okay," she said. "It's yours. No tricks. No pain. Just food." Minutes passed. The snow fell harder. Sarah's teeth began to chatter. The dog finally stretched his neck forward, barely moving his body, and sniffed the turkey. Then, with aching slowness, he pulled it closer with one paw and ate it in 3 desperate gulps. Sarah placed another piece, then another, each time sliding it closer to herself. Each time, the dog had to come a few inches farther out from under the truck. It took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of lying on frozen concrete while her body went numb and her hands lost feeling. 45 minutes of patient coaxing while Maggie stood watch, holding the blanket, shivering. Finally, the dog crawled out. The dog collapsed the moment he emerged from beneath the truck. His legs simply gave out, as if the effort of trusting had consumed whatever reserves remained. Sarah moved quickly, wrapping the blanket around his emaciated body while Maggie hurried to unlock the clinic door. The dog weighed almost nothing despite his size, all bone and terror wrapped in damaged fur. Inside the clinic's examination room, under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, the full extent of the damage became visible. Sarah had to pause, her hands hovering over the dog's body, fighting the rage that threatened to choke her professional composure. This wasn't neglect. This was torture. The circular burns from a cattle prod covered his shoulders and hindquarters, some old and scarred, others more recent and still healing poorly. Around his neck, beneath the matted fur, she found deep grooves where a metal chain had been embedded and then removed, cut away judging by the scar pattern, but left to heal without veterinary care. The infection had been severe. He was lucky to have survived it. 3 ribs were broken, healed incorrectly at angles that must have caused chronic pain. His left rear leg bore the signature of an old fracture, also improperly healed. 2 teeth were snapped off at the gum line from blunt force trauma. His paw pads were cracked and bleeding from walking on frozen ground. The tips of his ears and tail showed early signs of frostbite. "Mother of God," Maggie whispered from the doorway. "Who could do this?" Sarah didn't answer. She was setting up an IV line, her hands moving with practiced efficiency while her mind cataloged everything this dog would need to survive. Fluids first. He was severely dehydrated. Antibiotics for the infections she could already see festering in the older wounds. Pain medication, though she'd have to be careful with dosing given his emaciated state. Warming blankets to bring his body temperature up slowly. He was at 55 pounds when he should have been at least 80. Starvation on top of everything else. The dog lay motionless on the examination table, eyes open but glazed with exhaustion. He didn't resist when Sarah inserted the IV catheter, didn't flinch when she cleaned his wounds. He'd gone somewhere else in his mind, to that place animals go when the body has endured too much. Shutdown mode. One step away from giving up entirely. "You're going to make it," Sarah told him, pressing a stethoscope to his chest. His heartbeat was rapid, thready, but steady. "You didn't survive all of this just to die in my clinic." A sound from the doorway made her look up. Emma stood there in her pajamas, purple with white stars, the knees worn thin from too many washings, her eyes enormous in her small face. "Mom?" "I heard voices." "What's—" She saw the dog and froze. "Oh." "Baby, go back to bed," Sarah said automatically, positioning herself between Emma and the examination table. Not because the dog was dangerous, but because no 8-year-old should see this level of cruelty. But Emma had already moved, slipping under Sarah's outstretched arm with the liquid grace of childhood. She approached the table slowly, her bare feet silent on the tile floor. The dog's eyes tracked her movement. For the first time since arriving, something flickered in those amber depths. Awareness, recognition that this small human was something different. What happened to him? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah started to give her a sanitized version, but Maggie spoke first. Someone hurt him very badly. For a very long time. Emma reached out, not touching the dog but extending her hand so he could see it, smell it, understand she wasn't a threat. "I'm sorry," she said to the dog. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." The dog's ear twitched, just slightly. Listening. "Can I sit with him?" Emma asked. Every instinct Sarah had screamed to say no. This dog was unpredictable, traumatized. Any sudden movement, any perceived threat, and he might lash out. She'd seen it before, abused animals who loved and then attacked out of pure terror, unable to distinguish between past and present. But something in the dog's eyes stopped her objection. He was looking at Emma the way drowning people look at lifeboats. "You can sit in that chair," Sarah compromised, pointing to a stool in the corner. "Talk to him if you want, but don't touch him unless I say it's okay." Emma nodded solemnly and pulled the stool closer to the examination table. She settled onto it, tucking her feet under her, and began to speak in a low, steady voice. "Hi, my name's Emma. You don't know me yet, but I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like when everyone says you're okay, but you're not. My dad died 2 years ago. Everyone says I should be over it by now, but I'm not. I still miss him every day. I still have nightmares sometimes. So if you have nightmares too, that's okay. You don't have to pretend with me." Sarah's hands stilled on the IV bag she was adjusting. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw what she'd been missing. The performance of wellness. The careful construction of being fine that Emma had perfected to protect her mother from additional worry. The dog's eyes remained fixed on Emma. His ear twitched again, more deliberately this time. He was listening, actually listening. "My mom's a really good doctor," Emma continued. "She fixes animals all the time. She's going to fix you too. It might hurt sometimes. Medicine does that. But she'll make you better. I promise." The dog's breathing slowed slightly. The tension in his shoulders eased by barely perceptible degrees. Sarah finished setting up the warming blankets and checked the dog's temperature. 94 degrees, dangerously low, but rising. She administered pain medication and antibiotics, documented everything in her notes with shaking hands. $3,000 of emergency care, minimum. Her credit card would cover it, barely. The mortgage payment would have to wait another month. Maggie appeared at her elbow with coffee. "Sarah, honey, you should check for a microchip." "Of course." The microchip. Sarah retrieved the scanner from the cabinet and ran it over the dog's shoulders. The device beeped immediately. Her heart sank. A chip meant an owner with legal rights, regardless of what they'd done. The scanner's display showed a number, but it was preceded by a code she recognized. Military-grade encryption. This wasn't a pet store chip or a standard veterinary registration. "What does that mean?" Maggie asked, reading over her shoulder. Sarah stared at the screen, a cold certainty settling in her chest. "It means this isn't just any dog. This is a working dog. Military or police, was a working dog." She looked down at the battered animal on her table, at the scars that told a story of service and then betrayal. Somewhere, someone had decided this dog was no longer useful. Somewhere, someone had sold him or abandoned him. And somewhere along the way, someone had decided he deserved to suffer for his failure. "We need to find out who he belongs to," Sarah said quietly. Emma's head snapped up. "No." We can't give him back to whoever did this? Baby, if he has an owner, then his owner is a bad person and shouldn't get him back. Sarah opened her mouth to explain about property law and legal ownership, but Maggie's hand on her shoulder stopped her. Let's worry about that tomorrow, Maggie said firmly. Right now, let's just focus on keeping him alive through the night. The dog's eyes had closed. Whether from exhaustion or the pain medication, Sarah couldn't tell. His breathing was steady now, regulated. The IV dripped life back into his veins, one drop at a time. Emma refused to leave. She pulled the stool closer and rested her head on the edge of the examination table, one small hand stretched out toward the dog without touching him. Within minutes, she was asleep. Sarah dimmed the lights and settled into the chair by the door, wrapped in a spare blanket. Maggie took the couch in the waiting room. They would take turns keeping watch. If the dog crashed in the night, Sarah needed to be there. Through the window, snow fell in thick curtains. The blizzard had arrived. By morning, the roads would be impassable. Good, Sarah thought. Let them be snowed in. Let the world stay away for just a little while. At 2 a.m, the dog's eyes opened. He looked around the room, registering the IV in his leg, the blankets, the sleeping child beside him. His gaze found Sarah in the shadows. She held her breath, waiting to see if he would panic, fight, try to flee. Instead, he laid his head back down, closed his eyes, and sighed. It was the sound of something surrendering, not to death, but to the possibility of living. For the first time in years, Sarah understood the feeling. Christmas morning arrived with 3 feet of snow and a dog who had survived the night. Sarah woke with a crick in her neck from sleeping in the chair, her first conscious thought a prayer she hadn't realized she was making. She checked the dog's vitals before she'd even fully opened her eyes. Pulse steady. Temperature 97.4 degrees. Still low, but climbing. The IV bag was half empty. She replaced it with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the motions while her mind catalogued the impossibility of what she'd taken on. Emma was curled in a ball on the floor beside the examination table, using her coat as a pillow. At some point during the night, the dog had shifted position. His head now hung slightly over the edge of the table, positioned as if he'd been watching Emma sleep. Protecting her, Sarah realized. Even in his broken state, even terrified and in pain, some deeply embedded instinct had kicked in. This dog was a guardian. Maggie shuffled in from the waiting room carrying a thermos of coffee and a determination that seemed incongruous with the early hour. How is he? Alive. That's all I can say right now. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. The clinic's heating system struggled on the best days. With the blizzard raging outside, the building felt like an ice box. I've been thinking about that microchip, Maggie said, settling into the chair Sarah had vacated. My son David was a canine handler. He told me stories about what happens to military working dogs when they're retired. Most of them are adopted by their handlers. But if the handler dies... She paused, her voice catching on the word. If the handler dies, the dogs go into a system. Sometimes that system fails them. Sarah had been trying not to think about the microchip, about what it meant, about the Pandora's box of legal complications waiting once she scanned that code properly. But Maggie's words crystallized a fear she'd been pushing down. You think he's a military dog? Those scars aren't random, Sarah. That's training abuse. Someone bought or acquired a working dog and tried to retrain him using methods that would break anyone. Maggie's voice hardened. I've seen those patterns before. David showed me photos once, trying to explain why he got so angry when he heard about dogs being abused after service. He said they give everything for us, and then we throw them away like trash. Emma stirred on the floor, her eyes blinking open. For a moment she looked confused, as if she'd forgotten where she was or why she was sleeping on cold tile. Then her gaze found the dog and everything else fell away. "He's still here." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "He's still here." "What's his name?" Sarah hadn't thought about names. In her mind, he'd been the dog or the patient, professional distance to protect herself from the attachment already forming. "I don't know, sweetheart." Emma stood, brushing off her pajamas, and approached the examination table with the same slow deliberateness she'd shown the night before. The dog's eyes opened, tracking her movement. There was no fear in his gaze now, only a watchful curiosity. "Can I touch him?" Emma asked. Sarah started to say no, then stopped herself. She'd seen the way the dog looked at Emma, had watched something shift in those traumatized eyes when Emma spoke to him. Sometimes healing required trust, even when trust felt dangerous. Very gently, on his side, not his head. "And if he tenses up at all, you step back immediately. Understood?" Emma nodded solemnly. She extended her hand, palm down, letting the dog see it and smell it before making contact. When her fingers touched his fur, matted and dirty but warming now beneath the blankets, the dog's entire body went rigid. Sarah's hand moved to pull Emma back, but then the rigidity melted. The dog's tail, damaged as it was, moved once, twice. A hesitant wag. "Hi," Emma whispered. "I'm going to call you Atlas, because my teacher, Miss Patterson, says Atlas holds up the whole sky, and I think you've been holding up something really heavy for a really long time. Is that okay?" The tail wagged again, more deliberately. Sarah found herself blinking back tears. She turned away, busying herself with checking the IV line again, even though she'd just checked it. When had she become someone who cried over a dog wagging his tail? But she knew the answer. It was the same moment she'd become someone who couldn't afford her daughter's Christmas presents. The same moment she'd started measuring her worth in how little she needed. The same moment James had died and taken her ability to hope with him. The day passed in a strange domesticity enforced by the storm. They were trapped. No one could drive in this weather, and Sarah's truck was buried under snow. Maggie made breakfast from whatever she could find in Sarah's kitchen upstairs. Scrambled eggs and toast, coffee for the adults, and hot chocolate for Emma. They ate in the clinic, taking turns sitting with Atlas, monitoring his progress. Sarah changed his IV bags, administered medications, cleaned his wounds with a gentleness that surprised her. She'd been performing veterinary care mechanically for so long, going through motions without feeling. But with Atlas, every movement mattered. Every small improvement felt like a victory against impossible odds. By afternoon, he was strong enough to lift his head. By evening, he was trying to stand, his legs shaking with the effort. Sarah had to physically stop him, pressing gently on his shoulders. "Not yet, buddy. You need more time to heal." Atlas looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and she could see him understanding, accepting. This was a dog who knew discipline, who understood delayed gratification. But underneath that training was something else. A desperate need to prove his worth, to show that he could still perform, still function, still be useful. "You don't have to earn your keep," Sarah told him, surprised by the thickness in her voice. "You just have to rest." Emma had been reading to him all day. Charlotte's Web, which seemed grimly appropriate given the themes of salvation and sacrifice. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her voice steady and clear, and Atlas watched her with an intensity that went beyond mere attention. He was memorizing her, Sarah realized, learning her voice, her scent, her mannerisms, bonding with her in a way that transcended species. On the second morning, when Atlas finally ate solid food from Sarah's hand, just a few pieces of turkey, slowly offered, Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. It was a small thing, a simple thing, a dog eating. But it represented trust. It represented the possibility that broken things could heal given enough time and care. That afternoon, her phone rang. She'd been expecting it, dreading it. Dr. Robert Hayes, an old friend from veterinary school who now worked at the Air Force Base an hour south. She'd texted him about the microchip encryption. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Robert's voice was grave. "Where exactly did you find this dog?" "Under my truck. Christmas Eve." "Why?" "Because the registration number you sent me is flagged in the military database. That dog was Canine Rex. Military working dog, bomb detection and search and rescue specialist. 47 successful missions. 12 IED detections. 3 commendations for valor." Robert paused. His handler was killed in action in Afghanistan in 2019. Sarah's blood went cold. "Who was the handler?" "Lieutenant Marcus James Mitchell." The world tilted. Sarah had to sit down, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Marcus James Mitchell. James. Her James. "Sarah, you there?" "That's my husband," she whispered. "That's my husband's name. He died in 2019. Afghanistan." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats. "Jesus Christ. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were married to... you never talked about him being military." "He enlisted under his full name. I only knew him as James." Sarah's mind was racing, trying to piece together a puzzle she hadn't known existed. "He never mentioned a dog named Rex. He talked about working dogs, but never specifically, 'After the handler dies, the dog goes into a system,'" Robert interrupted gently. "Rex was assessed as traumatized, unable to continue service. He should have been offered to you first. That's protocol. Did anyone from the military contact you about him?" Sarah tried to remember those awful months after James died. The funeral, the paperwork, the debt collectors calling about medical bills. Someone had contacted her about James's personal effects, about his canine partner possibly needing placement. She'd said no. God help her, she'd said no. "I told them I couldn't handle it," she said, the words like broken glass in her throat. "I was drowning. Emma was barely functioning. I couldn't take on something else that needed me." "You weren't in a position to make that decision." They should have followed up, not just taken no for an answer. Robert's voice was firm, professional. "According to the records, Rex was transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Colorado, Healing Paws, but that place was shut down in 2021 for animal neglect. The dogs were auctioned off to private buyers. Who bought him? A man named Derek Hansen. Paid $15,000. Former military himself. Applied to be a police canine trainer but was denied. The denial note says, and I'm reading directly from the file here, documented use of aversive training techniques, multiple complaints from previous clients regarding excessive force with animals." Sarah looked across the room at Atlas, who was watching Emma with devoted attention as she read to him. This dog had saved lives, had served with honor, had lost his handler and his purpose. And then, he'd been sold to a man who had broken him piece by piece. "Robert, I need the full file on Derek Hansen. Everything you can find." "Sarah, this could get complicated. Legally, if Hansen has proof of purchase..." "I don't care about complicated. That man tortured James's dog. He tortured my husband's canine partner. And I'm not letting him anywhere near Atlas again." She said the name before she'd even registered that she'd accepted it. Atlas. Not Rex, not canine, anything. Atlas, the name Emma had given him, the name that fit. After she hung up, Sarah sat in silence, staring at her hands. Maggie had been listening from the doorway. She approached slowly, settling into the chair beside Sarah. "I recognized the scar patterns," Maggie said quietly. I've been watching him for 2 days and something felt familiar. David had pictures from Afghanistan. One of them showed a German shepherd with Marcus Mitchell. They were best friends, those two men. David wrote home about them constantly, called them the dynamic duo. When your husband died, my son died 20 feet away. Same ambush, same day. Sarah's head snapped up. David Chen was your son? Captain David Chen, K-9 handler. His dog was named Mason. A Belgian Malinois. Maggie's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled in her lap. Mason was killed in that ambush. David died trying to protect him. Marcus died trying to protect his unit. And Rex? Atlas. He was there for all of it. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. This dog had known James, had worked beside him, had been there when he died, and somehow through a series of failures and cruelties, he'd ended up under Sarah's truck 4 years later. David's last letter home mentioned Rex, Maggie continued. He wrote, "That dog is something special, Ma. Mitchell's lucky to have him. If anything happens to Mitchell, somebody better take care of Rex. He's earned it." I didn't know what happened to Rex after David died. Didn't know how to find out. And now here he is, broken and scared, but alive. Emma had stopped reading. She was listening to the adults, her young face struggling to process the implications. So, Atlas knew Daddy? Yes, baby. Atlas knew your father. Did Daddy love him? Sarah thought about James's last video call, about how he'd talked about the working dogs with such reverence and affection, about how he'd promised to get Emma a dog just like them when he came home. Yes, your father loved him very much. Emma looked at Atlas with new eyes, wonder and grief mixing on her face. She approached the examination table and gently placed her hand on his side. You were with my daddy when he died. You tried to save him, didn't you? Atlas's tail wagged slowly. His eyes, clear now and focused, seemed to understand the weight of the question. Thank you, Emma whispered. Thank you for trying to save him. Thank you for coming home to us. Sarah couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came in silent streams, 4 years of grief she'd been holding at bay finally breaking through. Maggie put an arm around her shoulders. Emma pressed against her other side, and Atlas, despite his injuries and exhaustion, stretched his neck to rest his head against Sarah's hand. They stayed like that as the storm raged outside and the afternoon light faded to evening. 4 souls bound together by loss and survival, finding in each other something they'd thought was gone forever. Hope. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep on her makeshift bed on the floor and Maggie had retired to the couch, Sarah sat alone with Atlas in the dim light of the clinic. She pulled up James's last video message on her phone, something she hadn't been able to watch in 2 years. His face filled the screen, dusty and tired but smiling. Hey, beautiful. Hey, Emma Bear, if you're watching this. Just wanted to check in. We had a good day today. Rex found an IED that would have taken out our entire convoy. This dog is incredible. So smart. So loyal. I keep thinking when I get home we should get Emma a dog just like him. A German shepherd. They're amazing with kids. They never give up on you, you know. No matter what happens, they stay. The video ended. Sarah looked at Atlas, who was watching her with those knowing eyes. You came home, she told him. You found your way home to us. I don't know how, but you did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry it took you this long to find us, but you're here now. You're home now. And I promise, I swear on everything I have, I will never let anyone hurt you again. Atlas's tail wagged once. He laid his head down, keeping one paw extended toward her. A bridge, a connection. Sarah took his paw gently in her hand and held it while they both fell into the first peaceful sleep either had experienced in years. The knock on the door came 6 days later, just as Atlas was taking his first steady steps without assistance. Sarah had been walking him slowly around the clinic, Emma at his other side, all three of them celebrating the small victory of mobility. When the sharp rap echoed through the building, Atlas's entire demeanor changed. His hackles rose. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the first aggressive sound he'd made since arriving. Sarah looked through the window and felt her stomach drop. A man stood on the porch, gaunt and hard-edged, wearing a military surplus jacket despite the cold. His eyes, even at a distance, held an intensity that made her instinctively position herself between him and Emma. "Stay here with Atlas," she told Emma quietly. To Maggie, who had been washing dishes in the small clinic kitchenette, "Call the sheriff. Tell him we might have a situation." Sarah opened the door only wide enough to speak through. "Can I help you?" The man looked her over with an assessment that felt invasive. "I'm looking for my dog, German Shepherd. Someone said you took in a stray, big one, about this tall." He held his hand at hip height. Every protective instinct Sarah possessed screamed at her to lie, to deny, to slam the door in his face. But she could see Derek Hansen's truck parked in her lot, could see the determination in his posture. Lying would only delay the inevitable. "What makes you think he's here?" "Small town. Word gets around. Lady at the diner said the vet's daughter was talking about a big German Shepherd they saved on Christmas. That's my dog." He pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket. "Got the purchase receipt right here. Registration papers. Microchip number matches what the military database shows for a dog sold at auction in 2021. That dog is my property, and I want him back." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. "Even if I did have a dog matching that description, I'd need to verify your documentation, and I'd need to assess whether returning an animal to your care would be in that animal's best interest." Derek's jaw tightened. "I don't need your assessment. I have legal ownership. The law says that dog is mine. The law also says animals can be seized in cases of abuse and neglect. That dog, if he's the one you claim, was starving, covered in scars from torture, and had untreated medical conditions that nearly killed him. That dog ran away. I looked for him. Not my fault he got himself into trouble." "For how long?" Sarah's voice dropped to something cold and controlled. "How long did you look? Because he was under my truck for hours before we found him, and he'd been on the road for weeks based on his condition. No posts on social media about a missing dog, no calls to local shelters, no police report. You didn't look for him at all, did you, Mr. Hansen?" His face flushed red. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about. I know cattle prod burns when I see them. I know what a chain embedded in flesh looks like. I know what systematic abuse looks like because I've been a veterinarian for 12 years, and I have never seen a dog as damaged as that one. So you'll forgive me if I don't immediately hand him over to you. Lady, I don't think you understand. I paid $15,000 for that dog. I trained him. He failed every test, aggressive, uncontrollable. I tried everything. He's not a pet. He's a working dog that couldn't work. That makes him my problem to solve." Behind Sarah, she heard Atlas's growl intensify. She glanced back to see Emma holding his collar, tears streaming down her face, while Atlas strained toward the door with an expression that was pure terror mixed with rage. He knew this man. He knew this voice, and every fiber of his being was screaming danger. "You need to leave," Sarah said firmly. "Right now, before I call the sheriff myself." Derek's expression hardened into something uglier. "You have 1 week to get your affairs in order. Then I'm coming back with my lawyer. That dog cost me 15 grand. He's mine, and I'm taking back what belongs to me. You can make this easy, or you can make this hard, but either way, I'm getting my property back." He turned and walked to his truck, his movements deliberate and controlled. But Sarah saw the rage in the set of his shoulders, the violence barely contained beneath the surface. This was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through force. The moment his truck pulled out of the lot, Sarah's knees buckled. She caught herself against the door frame, breathing hard, trying to contain the panic rising in her chest. Maggie was already on the phone with the sheriff's office, her voice crisp and authoritative, the principal voice that had commanded respect for 30 years. Emma had wrapped her arms around Atlas's neck, sobbing into his fur while the dog stood rigid, every muscle tensed. "He can't take him," Emma gasped between sobs. "Mom, he can't take Atlas. He just can't." Sarah crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter, pulling both Emma and Atlas into an embrace. "I won't let him. I promise you, baby. I will do everything in my power to keep Atlas safe." But even as she said the words, the legal reality pressed down on her like a physical weight. Derek Hansen had papers. He had receipts. He had legal ownership, regardless of what he'd done. In the eyes of the law, Atlas was property. Damaged property that Hansen could reclaim with the right documentation. Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived 20 minutes later, a stocky man in his 50s who'd known Sarah since she'd moved to Evergreen. He listened to her account, examined the papers Derek had shoved at her, and his face grew increasingly grim. "Sarah, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If Hansen's papers check out, the law's on his side. You can file a complaint for animal abuse, but you'd need proof, recent proof, not just healed scars. Look at Atlas. Look at what was done to him. I am looking, and I see a dog that's been abused sometime in his past. But proving Hansen did it, proving it was intentional and not neglect, proving it's recent enough to matter legally, that's a different story. Dogs heal, scars fade. Defense lawyer will argue the dog was in poor condition when Hansen acquired him, or that the dog was injured after he ran away. Hard to prove otherwise. So that monster just gets to take him back? Gets to finish whatever he started?" Tom rubbed his face tiredly. "I can file a report, document the dog's condition, but without witnesses to the actual abuse, without current injuries that can be definitively tied to Hansen, my hands are tied. This is a civil property matter, not a criminal one." "You'd need to fight it in court." "Then I'll fight it in court. I'll get a lawyer. Sarah stopped, reality crashing over her. Lawyers cost money. Court cases cost money. Money she didn't have. The emergency treatment for Atlas had already maxed out her credit card. The mortgage was 4 months behind. She was barely keeping the lights on. Tom saw the realization on her face, and his expression softened. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. That dog clearly means something to you and Emma. But Hansen has the law on his side, and unless you can afford to challenge him legally—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. After Tom left, Sarah sat at her desk and stared at the numbers she'd been avoiding for weeks. Bank account, $847. Credit cards, maxed out. The GoFundMe page. Maggie had suggested was a possibility. But how did you explain to the internet that you were fighting to keep a dog that legally belonged to someone else? How did you explain that this wasn't just about a dog, but about keeping a promise to a dead husband, about giving a traumatized child something to hold on to, about proving that love and loyalty mattered more than property rights? The legal consultation alone would cost $500. An actual court case could run into the tens of thousands, money she didn't have, money she couldn't get. Emma appeared in the doorway, Atlas at her side. The dog was leaning against her leg in that protective stance Sarah had come to recognize. "Mom, I have something." She held out a jar. Sarah's heart broke as she recognized it. Emma's savings jar, the one she'd been filling with birthday money and coins found under couch cushions for 2 years. Emma had been saving for a new bike, one that wasn't held together with duct tape and hope. "This is for Atlas," Emma said. "For the lawyer." Sarah opened the jar with shaking hands. $23.47. The entirety of her daughter's material wealth offered without hesitation. "Baby, I can't take this. You've been saving for—" "I don't need a bike. I need Atlas." Emma's voice was firm, certain in the way only children can be when they see moral clarity where adults see complications. "He needs us, more than I need anything else." Maggie stepped forward, pulling her wallet from her purse. "I have retirement savings, not much, but enough to help. That dog is David's legacy as much as Marcus's. I won't let him be destroyed." Sarah looked at these two people, her found family, and felt something shift inside her chest. For 3 years she'd been operating alone, convinced that asking for help was weakness, that needing people meant risking the devastation of losing them. But here they were, offering everything they had for a dog they barely knew because they understood what he represented. Hope, healing, the possibility that broken things could be made whole. "I can't ask you to do this," Sarah whispered. "You're not asking," Maggie said firmly. "We're telling you. We're in this together." That night, after Emma fell asleep with Atlas curled beside her bed, a position he'd claimed and defended with gentle insistence, Sarah sat down and did something she hadn't done since James died. She reached out for help. The email to Linda Parsons, the waitress at the diner, was simple. "I need help saving Atlas. Derek Hansen is coming back with lawyers. I can't afford to fight him alone." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then sat back and waited for the crushing weight of rejection that surely must come. Who would care about one dog in a world full of problems? The response came within 30 minutes. "How much do you need? And where do we start?" By morning, Linda had mobilized. The diner became command central. A GoFundMe page went live, "Save Atlas, a hero dog's second chance." The story was carefully worded. No accusations against Hansen, just the facts. Military working dog, lost his handler, ended up abandoned and starving, now facing return to previous owner. The goal was set at $5,000 for legal fees. Day 1, $400, mostly from townspeople Sarah barely knew. The woman who ran the hardware store. The teenage kid who pumped gas at the only station in town. A retired teacher who remembered Emma from kindergarten. Day 2, $1,200. The story had been picked up by the local newspaper. A photograph of Emma reading to Atlas accompanied the article, and something about that image, the small girl with the giant dog, both of them looking at each other with perfect trust, resonated. Day 3, $3,800. Someone had posted the story on Reddit, then Facebook, then Twitter. The comment section filled with people sharing their own stories of rescued animals, of second chances, of fighting systems that valued ownership over welfare. Day 4, $8,400. A minor celebrity, some actor from a show Sarah didn't watch, had retweeted the story with the comment, "This is what heroism looks like. Help them keep this family together." By the end of the week, the GoFundMe had raised $34,000. Enough for a lawyer, enough for court fees, enough for expert witnesses, enough to fight. Sarah stared at the number on her computer screen and couldn't breathe. Strangers, thousands of strangers had looked at her story and decided it mattered, had decided Atlas mattered, had decided that love was worth defending against property law. But the money brought complications she hadn't anticipated. Derek Hansen saw the GoFundMe page. He saw the news coverage, and he saw an opportunity. His lawyer's letter arrived on day 8, delivered by certified mail. The language was dense and threatening, but the core message was simple. Sarah Mitchell had stolen Derek Hansen's property and was now profiting from that theft. The GoFundMe proceeds could be considered fraudulent if they were obtained under false pretenses. If Sarah did not return the dog immediately, Hansen would sue not just for the dog's return, but for the full amount raised by the campaign, plus punitive damages, plus legal fees. The amount they were threatening, $250,000. Sarah read the letter 3 times, each reading making the words feel more surreal. This wasn't about a dog anymore. This was about destroying her, about taking everything, her clinic, her home, her ability to provide for Emma, about punishing her for daring to care. She called the pro bono lawyer the GoFundMe donors had helped her hire. Jennifer Martinez was young, fierce, and specialized in animal law. She'd driven 3 hours from Billings to take the case because, in her words, "This is exactly the kind of bullshit that makes me sick." Jennifer read the letter and smiled grimly. Good. He's overplaying his hand. How is threatening to bankrupt me overplaying his hand? Because he's revealing his real motivation. This isn't about getting his property back. This is about ego, about not losing, about punishing you for challenging him. And that, Sarah, is something we can use in court. Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of fervor that made Sarah understand why this woman had chosen to fight for animals. We're going to discover every single piece of Hansen's history, his training business, his military record, every dog that passed through his hands. We're going to build a pattern of abuse that's so clear, so documented, that no judge will rule in his favor. But the law says animals are property. But the law also has provisions for removing property from owners who abuse it. We just have to prove abuse. And sweetheart, with what you've documented in Atlas's medical records, we've got a fighting chance. Sarah wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that justice would prevail, that the system would protect Atlas. But she'd been disappointed by systems before, had watched military bureaucracy fail her when James died, had watched medical bills destroy her finances while insurance companies found loopholes, had watched her daughter withdraw into herself while therapists checked boxes on forms and declared her progressing nicely. Systems failed people. They failed all the time. "What if we lose?" Sarah asked quietly. Jennifer's expression sobered. "Then we appeal, and if we lose the appeal, we find another way." But Sarah, you need to understand something. This case isn't just about Atlas anymore. This story has gone viral. There are hundreds of thousands of people watching what happens here. The pressure on the judge, on the court system, to do the right thing is enormous. That doesn't guarantee we'll win, but it means we're not fighting alone. After Jennifer left, Sarah went to find Emma. She was in the clinic playroom, a small space Sarah had set up with donated toys and books for young clients, lying on the floor with her head on Atlas's side. The dog's tail thumped when Sarah entered, but he didn't move. He'd learned that Emma needed him to be still sometimes, to be an anchor. "Emma, I need to talk to you about something serious." Her daughter's face went carefully blank, the expression she'd perfected when bracing for bad news. "There's a chance we might lose Atlas. Derek Hansen has good lawyers. He has the law on his side. And even though we're going to fight as hard as we can, I need you to understand that we might not win." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hand buried in Atlas's fur. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Do you remember what you told me after Daddy died, when I asked why God let bad things happen to good people?" Sarah remembered. She'd said something inadequate about not understanding God's plan, about how sometimes terrible things happened, and we had to find meaning in them anyway. It had been a terrible answer, the kind adults give children when they don't have good answers. "You said that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control what we do about it. We can choose to be brave even when we're scared. We can choose to fight even when we might lose." Emma looked up at her mother with eyes that seemed far too old for 8 years. "So that's what we do. We fight. And if we lose, at least Atlas will know that someone loved him enough to try." Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, this small, fierce person who'd somehow retained her capacity for hope despite everything life had taken from her. Atlas shifted, resting his chin on both of them, completing the circle. "You're right," Sarah whispered. "We fight. No matter what." Through the window, she could see Derek Hanson's truck driving slowly past the clinic. A reminder, a threat, a promise that this was far from over. Sarah met his eyes through the glass and didn't look away. Let him see what he was up against. Not just a widow and a child, but an entire community that had decided love mattered more than ownership. The battle for Atlas had begun. The town hall meeting on February 17th began with a prayer and ended with shouting. Sarah hadn't wanted a public spectacle. Jennifer had advised keeping things quiet until the court date, but Councilman Brooks had forced the issue. The agenda item read simply, "Discussion of public safety concerns regarding aggressive animal in residential area." Everyone knew what it really meant. The community center was packed beyond capacity, folding chairs arranged in tight rows that still left dozens of people standing against the walls. Sarah sat in the front row between Emma and Maggie, Atlas lying at Emma's feet. The dog had been granted special permission to attend as evidence, though Sarah suspected the real reason was that Judge Brennan, who would ultimately hear the case, wanted to see how he behaved in a public setting. Atlas was perfect. He lay quietly, his attention focused primarily on Emma but occasionally shifting to scan the room. Not with aggression, but with the alert awareness of a trained guardian. When children approached to pet him, and several did, unable to resist, he remained still and gentle, his tail offering measured wags of greeting. Derek Hanson sat in the back row, flanked by 2 men Sarah didn't recognize. Veterans, she guessed, from the way they carried themselves. His support network, his witnesses, probably. Men who would testify that Derek was a good trainer, a good man, that the dog was dangerous, and Sarah was a hysterical woman who'd stolen valuable property. Councilman Brooks called the meeting to order with officious precision. He was a thin man in his 60s, the kind who'd spent his career following rules and saw deviation from procedure as moral failure. "We're here to discuss the German Shepherd currently residing at Dr. Mitchell's clinic. Multiple citizens have expressed concern about safety, given the animal's size and unknown history." "The dog's history isn't unknown," Maggie Chen spoke up from her seat, her voice carrying the authority of her former position. "Atlas is a decorated military working dog who served with distinction in Afghanistan. His history includes saving lives, not threatening them." "Mrs. Chen, you'll have an opportunity to speak when recognized." Brooks's tone was condescending. "First, I'd like to hear from Mr. Hanson, who claims legal ownership of the animal in question." Derek stood slowly, and Sarah felt Emma tense beside her. Atlas's ears flattened slightly, the only sign of his distress. Derek walked to the front of the room, positioning himself near the podium but not behind it, a calculated choice that made him seem more approachable, less confrontational. "Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate the opportunity to set the record straight." His voice was measured, reasonable. "I purchased the dog legally in 2021 from a military auction. I'm a veteran myself, served in Afghanistan. I thought I could give this dog a second chance, train him for police work or private security, but he proved difficult, aggressive, failed every certification test. I spent thousands of dollars trying to rehabilitate him, but nothing worked." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was a careful manipulation of the truth. "In November, the dog escaped from my property. I looked for him, filed reports, but he was gone. I assumed he'd died in the wilderness. Frankly, given his temperament, I thought that was the most likely outcome. Then I heard through mutual acquaintances that Dr. Mitchell had taken in a German shepherd. I simply want back what's legally mine." A woman in the third row raised her hand. "If the dog was so aggressive and difficult, why do you want him back?" Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because I paid good money for him. Because I invested time and resources into his training. Because he's my property, and I don't appreciate having my property stolen, regardless of Dr. Mitchell's good intentions." "He's not property," Emma's voice rang out before Sarah could stop her. "He's family, and you hurt him. You hurt him really bad." "Emma?" Sarah reached for her daughter, but Emma was already on her feet, Atlas rising beside her. "Young lady, sit down." Brooks's voice was sharp. "This is not appropriate." "You want to see inappropriate?" Emma's face was flushed, tears streaming. "Look at this!" She grabbed the folder Sarah had brought, the one containing Atlas's medical records, and pulled out a photograph. It showed Atlas on the day they'd found him, skeletal, covered in scars, eyes hollow with trauma. She held it up for the room to see. The crowd gasped. Several people looked away. That's what Mr. Hansen's training did. That's what difficult looks like when someone decides to punish a dog for not being perfect. Emma's voice cracked. Atlas isn't aggressive, he's scared. He's scared because someone hurt him over and over until he forgot what it felt like to be safe. "Enough!" Brooks slammed his gavel. "Mrs. Mitchell, control your daughter or I'll have you both removed." But Linda Parsons was already standing. "I think Emma has every right to speak. This is a town hall meeting, isn't it? Where citizens express their concerns? Well, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that we're more worried about property rights than we are about preventing animal cruelty." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Another hand went up. Tom Bradley, the sheriff. "I'd like to add something to the record. I've personally observed the dog in question multiple times over the past 6 weeks. I've seen him interact with children, with strangers, with other animals. I have not witnessed a single instance of aggressive behavior. What I have witnessed is a well-mannered animal who shows signs of past trauma but no current threat to public safety." Derek's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who'd driven in from Billings, stood. "Sheriff Bradley, isn't it true that you're friends with Dr. Mitchell? That your assessment might be biased?" "I'm friendly with half this town. Doesn't make my professional judgment biased. I'm stating facts based on observation and my 20 years of law enforcement experience." The lawyer smiled thinly. "And yet the dog's training records show a pattern of fear-aggression, multiple failed evaluations, an assessment that deemed him unsuitable for any working capacity. Those are also facts." "Written by whom?" Maggie Chen was on her feet now. "By Mr. Hansen. By evaluators he hired. Have you looked into Mr. Hansen's training methods? His business was shut down. He was denied certification as a police K-9 trainer. Why? Because multiple complaints were filed about his use of excessive force." Derek's face flushed red. "That's a lie." "It's documented public record," Maggie shot back. "I pulled the files myself. 3 separate complaints in 2021 and 2022 about aggressive training techniques. No formal charges because the complainants were pressured to drop them, but the complaints are there." The room erupted. Half the crowd was shouting support for Sarah, the other half yelling about property rights and legal precedent. Brooks hammered his gavel uselessly, his face purple with frustration. Through the chaos, Sarah watched Derek, watched his mask slip, watched fury and something else, something that looked almost like pain, flash across his face before he locked it down again. "Order!" Brooks's voice finally cut through. "This meeting is getting out of hand." We will take a 15-minute recess, and when we return, we will conduct ourselves with civility or I will clear the room." During the break, Sarah found herself surrounded by supporters, people pressing envelopes of cash into her hands for legal fees, people sharing their own stories of rescued animals, of fighting systems, of refusing to give up. An elderly man she'd never met gripped her shoulder and said simply, "That dog chose you. That matters." But she also heard the whispers from the other side. "It's just a dog. Law is law. She's making a fool of herself. Hansen has rights." When the meeting resumed, Jennifer Martinez stood to speak. She'd been in the back, observing, taking notes. Now she approached the podium with the confidence of someone who'd litigated hundreds of cases. "My name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm an attorney specializing in animal law, and I'm representing Dr. Mitchell pro bono. I'd like to address several misconceptions that have been presented tonight." She clicked a remote, and a projector screen descended behind her. The first image was Atlas's medical report, detailed and damning. "This is the condition of the dog on December 25th. 55 pounds, 30 pounds underweight for his size. Multiple infected wounds. Broken ribs healed incorrectly. Starvation, frostbite. Scars consistent with electric shock torture. This isn't neglect. This is systematic abuse." Next slide, Derek's business records. "This is Mr. Hansen's dog training business. Opened 2021. Closed 2023. Reason for closure: repeated violations of humane training standards. 3 complaints filed. Multiple clients requesting refunds after witnessing concerning training methods." Next slide, military records. "This is K9 Rex's service record. 47 successful missions. 12 IED detections. 3 Valor commendations." After his handler's death, he was assessed as traumatized but not dangerous. The recommendation was family placement with extensive support. Instead, he was sent to a facility that was later shut down for neglect, then auctioned to Mr. Hansen. Next slide, a photograph of Atlas now. Healthy weight, shiny coat, lying peacefully beside Emma as she read. This is the same dog 6 weeks later. This is what happens when an animal is given proper care and compassion. Mr. Hansen claims the dog is aggressive. I submit that what Mr. Hansen calls aggression is actually a trauma response to abuse. And I submit that returning this dog to Mr. Hansen's custody would be tantamount to a death sentence. Derek's lawyer was on his feet. "Objection. This isn't a courtroom, counsel. You can't just throw around accusations without... Everything I've stated is documented and verifiable. I'm not making accusations. I'm presenting facts." Jennifer's voice was steel. "And here's one more fact. Montana law allows for the seizure of animals in cases of abuse. Code 45.8.211. We have photographic evidence. We have veterinary testimony. We have behavioral assessments. Mr. Hansen can claim ownership all he wants, but ownership doesn't give him the right to torture." The room was silent now, everyone hanging on her words. This case is going before Judge Brennan in 3 days. At that hearing, all of this evidence will be formally presented. But I wanted this community to know what's really at stake here. This isn't about property rights or legal technicalities. This is about whether we, as a society, value life and welfare over ownership, whether we believe that living beings can be treated as disposable, whether we think someone who saves lives in war deserves to die in peace or die in fear at the hands of his abuser. She clicked off the projector and turned to face Derek directly. "Mr. Hansen, I know you're a veteran. I know you've served and sacrificed, but that doesn't give you the right to take your pain out on an innocent animal. Atlas didn't fail you. You failed him. And this community isn't going to let you finish what you started." Derek stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. For a moment, Sarah thought he might lunge at Jennifer, might explode into the violence she could see coiled in his shoulders. But one of his companions grabbed his arm, whispered something urgent in his ear. Derek shook him off and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. His lawyer followed, pausing at the door. "See you in court, Ms. Martinez. And for the record, everything you just did could be considered prejudicial to our case. Judge Brennan won't appreciate the media circus." "Then your client shouldn't have forced a public meeting?" Jennifer replied calmly. After they left, Councilman Brooks cleared his throat. "Well, I believe we've adequately discussed the matter. The court will make its determination. This meeting is adjourned." But nobody moved. Instead, one by one, people began to stand. First Linda, then the sheriff, then the elderly man who'd spoken to Sarah earlier, then dozens more, standing in silent solidarity, their message clear. Emma looked up at her mother, confused. "What are they doing?" Maggie smiled, tears in her eyes. "They're telling us we're not alone." Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. The armor she'd been wearing since James died, the walls she'd built to protect herself from more loss. These people, most of them strangers 6 weeks ago, were choosing to stand with her, choosing to believe that one dog's life mattered enough to fight for. Atlas stood and leaned against Emma's legs, his tail wagging slowly. He didn't understand the legal battles or the politics. He only understood that these people were his pack now, his family. And he would protect them with everything he had. Outside, through the community center windows, Sarah saw Derek's truck idling in the parking lot, watching, waiting. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time since that knock on her door, Sarah believed they might actually win. The night before the court hearing, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood in the clinic at 3 a.m, watching Atlas sleep beside Emma's makeshift bed on the floor. The dog's paws twitched occasionally, running through some dream landscape. She wondered if he dreamed of Afghanistan, of James, of the life he'd had before everything fell apart, or if he dreamed of the abuse, the fear, the endless cold night under her truck. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "Get some rest. We're ready. Trust the process." But Sarah had stopped trusting processes years ago. Processes had failed to save James. Processes had buried her in medical debt. Processes had nearly let Derek Hansen walk away with Atlas without consequence. Why should she trust that this process would be any different? She made coffee and sat at her desk, looking one more time through the folder of evidence. Atlas's medical records. Photographs documenting his transformation from skeletal wraith to healthy dog. Statements from Sheriff Bradley, from the animal control officer who'd evaluated him, from neighbors who'd witnessed his gentle nature. Jennifer had built a compelling case, but Derek's lawyer had built one too. Purchase receipts, registration papers, training logs that painted Atlas as dangerous and unpredictable. Veterinary records Derek had fabricated showing the dog in good health before he ran away. It was all lies, but lies backed by paperwork looked like truth in a courtroom. The real blow had come 3 days ago when Jennifer received Derek's witness list. He'd found the original military evaluator who deemed Atlas unsuitable for continued service. The man would testify that the dog had shown fear-based aggression and inability to adapt post-trauma. On paper, it would sound like Atlas was dangerous. In reality, it meant the dog had been grieving his handler and the military had given up on him too quickly. Derek was also bringing character witnesses, fellow veterans who'd served with him who would testify to his dedication to working dogs, his expertise in training, his honorable service. Men who either didn't know what Derek had become or had chosen to look the other way out of misplaced loyalty. Sarah had witnesses too. But would they be enough? At 5 a.m., Maggie appeared in the doorway with a thermos of coffee and grim determination. Couldn't sleep either? Keep thinking about what happens if we lose. Then we don't lose. Maggie sat down heavily. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Sarah looked up, alarmed by the tone in Maggie's voice. Derek Hansen was in David's unit. I didn't remember at first. David mentioned so many names in his letters. But I went through them all, and there it is. Private First Class Derek Hansen. David wrote about him twice. Once to say he was a talented dog handler, and once, 3 months later, to say the man had changed. That's the word David used, changed. He said Derek had become withdrawn, angry, that something had broken in him during a mission gone wrong. The ambush, Sarah said quietly, the one that killed James and David. Derek was there. He saw it happen. His own canine partner, Mason, was killed. David's notes say Mason took bullets meant for Derek. The dog died saving him. Maggie's voice shook. Derek watched his dog die protecting him. Then he watched David die. Then he watched your husband die. All in the same afternoon. And he survived. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. Survivor's guilt. Combined with PTSD, with loss, with rage at the universe for taking everyone except him, I think Derek bought Atlas, bought Rex, because he recognized him from that day. I think he thought if he could train Rex to be perfect, to be everything Mason was, it would somehow make sense of what happened. And when Rex couldn't do it, when the trauma made him fail those evaluations, Derek saw it as one more betrayal, one more thing abandoning him. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, it doesn't. But it explains it. Derek isn't evil, Sarah. He's broken, and broken people break things. Maggie reached across the desk and took Sarah's hand. I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for him. I'm saying it because when you're in that courtroom today, when the judge asks you questions, remember that Derek needs help, but Atlas needs safety. Both things can be true, but only one matters for today's decision. At 7 a.m., Emma woke up. She dressed carefully in the outfit they'd picked out together, a simple blue dress that made her look older than 8, more serious. She brushed Atlas carefully, working out every tangle in his coat until he gleamed. You have to be really good today, Emma told him, the best you've ever been, because the judge needs to see who you really are. Atlas's tail wagged slowly, as if he understood the gravity of what was coming. They arrived at the courthouse in Billings at 8:30 for the 9 a.m. hearing. The parking lot was already full. News vans lined the street. The story had attracted regional attention, with several outlets framing it as a test case for animal rights versus property law. Sarah avoided the cameras, hurrying inside with Emma and Atlas, while Maggie and Jennifer ran interference with reporters. The courthouse was an imposing building, all marble and dark wood, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. They were directed to Courtroom C, where Judge Carol Brennan would preside. Sarah had researched the judge extensively. 62 years old, 30 years on the bench. Known as fair but strict, with no patience for emotional appeals or procedural games. She followed the law to the letter. That could be good or bad depending on which letter of the law mattered most today. Derek was already there, seated with his lawyer at the defendant's table. He looked different somehow, smaller, older. The anger that had radiated from him at the town hall meeting had been replaced by something more contained but no less intense. When he saw Atlas, his expression flickered. Pain, longing, rage. It passed in a second, but Sarah saw it. The bailiff called them to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Carol Brennan. Judge Brennan entered with brisk efficiency. She was shorter than Sarah expected, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with the air of someone who'd seen every variation of human drama and was unimpressed by all of it. This is the matter of Hansen versus Mitchell regarding custody of a German Shepherd currently residing with the defendant. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This is not a criminal trial. This is a civil property dispute with animal welfare considerations. I will not tolerate grandstanding, emotional appeals, or media theatrics. We will examine the facts, apply the relevant law, and make a determination. Is that understood? Both lawyers nodded. Good. Mr. Henderson, you're representing the plaintiff. Make your case. Derek's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is straightforward. My client purchased a dog legally in 2021. He has receipts, registration papers, and microchip documentation proving ownership. The dog ran away from his property in November 2024. Rather than contacting my client upon finding the dog, Dr. Mitchell kept the animal, incurred medical expenses, and created a media campaign portraying my client as abusive. This constitutes theft. We're asking for the dog's immediate return and compensation for damages including reputational harm. What damages specifically? The GoFundMe campaign raised $34,000 based on false allegations against my client. My client's reputation has been damaged. He's received death threats. His business prospects have been harmed. We're seeking $250,000 in damages. Judge Brennan's eyebrow rose. You're seeking $250,000 over a dog? Over theft and defamation, Your Honor. I see. Ms. Martinez, your response? Jennifer stood. Your Honor, Dr. Mitchell found an abandoned animal in life-threatening condition on Christmas Eve. She provided emergency care as any veterinarian would. Upon discovering a microchip, she attempted to trace the owner through proper channels. When Mr. Hansen appeared claiming ownership, she became aware of the dog's history and his condition suggested abuse. Under Montana Code 458211, she had legal grounds to refuse return of the animal pending investigation. This isn't theft. This is responsible intervention in an animal cruelty case. Do you have evidence of abuse? Extensive evidence, Your Honor. Medical records documenting starvation, torture, and neglect. Photographic evidence. Expert testimony from veterinarians and animal behaviorists. Training records showing Mr. Hansen's use of aversive methods that violate humane standards. And does the plaintiff dispute this evidence? Henderson stood again. We dispute the interpretation, Your Honor. The dog was in poor condition, yes, but Mr. Hansen maintains the dog ran away and suffered those injuries while missing. Furthermore, the dog's military evaluation reports show he was already traumatized and difficult when my client acquired him. Any current behavioral issues stem from that original trauma, not from my client's training methods. Judge Brennan looked at Derek directly. Mr. Hansen, you're a veteran? Derek stood. Yes, Your Honor. Army. Served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I was a K-9 handler. And you purchased this dog knowing he was traumatized? I thought I could help him, Your Honor. Thought my experience would make a difference. But he was too far gone. Failed every certification. Became aggressive. I did everything I could, but some dogs can't be saved. Yet you want him back. Derek's jaw tightened. He's my property. I invested time and money. Just because something's difficult doesn't mean you abandon it. Interesting perspective. Judge Brennan's tone was unreadable. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to see your medical evidence. Mr. Henderson, your documentation of ownership. Bailiff, please dim the lights for the presentation. The next hour was brutal. Jennifer presented photograph after photograph of Atlas's injuries. The courtroom gasped at the cattle prod burns, at the embedded chain scars, at the evidence of systematic torture. Dr. Robert Hayes testified about the dog's condition, about the extensive treatment required, about the psychological trauma evident in his behavior. Then Derek's veterinarian took the stand, a man who'd examined Atlas twice during Derek's ownership and found him healthy, if thin. Sarah wanted to scream. The vet was lying or incompetent, possibly both, but he had credentials and official records. The animal behaviorist Jennifer hired testified about Atlas's current temperament: stable, gentle, protective, but not aggressive. Then Derek's trainer testified about the dog's unpredictable reactions and fear-based aggression during evaluations. Expert after expert, narrative competing with narrative. Finally, Judge Brennan said, "I'd like to see the dog." Atlas was brought forward. He walked calmly beside Emma, his attention focused on her, but his posture relaxed. When they reached the judge's bench, he sat without being commanded. "Emma, is it?" Judge Brennan's voice softened slightly. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me about Atlas." Emma looked at her mother, who nodded encouragement. "He's my best friend. He sleeps by my bed every night. When I have nightmares, he puts his paw on my hand. When I'm sad, he stays with me until I feel better. He doesn't talk, but he understands everything. He makes me feel safe." "Do you love him?" "More than anything." Emma's voice cracked. "Please don't take him away. Please." Judge Brennan's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Hansen, please approach the bench." Derek walked forward stiffly. The moment Atlas saw him, every muscle in his body went rigid. His ears flattened. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the first aggressive sound he'd made in court. "Interesting reaction," Judge Brennan observed. "Call the dog, Mr. Hansen." "Rex, come here." Derek's voice was command firm, the tone of a handler expecting obedience. Atlas didn't move. The growl intensified. "Rex, come!" Atlas pressed against Emma's legs, trembling. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "I won't let him hurt you." Judge Brennan watched this exchange with sharp attention. "Ms. Mitchell, call the dog." Sarah stood. "Atlas, come." Immediately the trembling stopped. Atlas looked at Emma, who nodded permission. He walked to Sarah, sat at her feet, leaned against her leg. The transformation from terrified to calm took seconds. "Remarkable," Judge Brennan said quietly. She looked at Derek. "Mr. Hansen, that dog is terrified of you. I've seen traumatized animals before. I know what fear looks like. And that is a dog who fears you specifically. He's been poisoned against me. In 6 weeks, you think Dr. Mitchell somehow trained this dog to fear you in 6 weeks. That's not how trauma works, Mr. Hansen." The judge's voice was sharp now. "I've been listening to both sides' present evidence all morning, and you know what I keep coming back to. That dog chose. Animals can't speak, but they communicate. And Atlas has communicated very clearly who he trusts and who he fears." She paused, reviewing her notes. The courtroom was dead silent. "However, the law is clear. Animals are property. Mr. Hansen has documentation proving ownership. Feelings don't override property rights." Judge Brennan looked at Sarah. "No matter how much we might wish they did." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. Emma made a small sound of distress. Maggie reached for Sarah's hand. "That said," Judge Brennan continued, "Montana law also allows for the seizure of property in cases of abuse. The evidence presented today shows clear abuse. Whether that abuse occurred before or during Mr. Hansen's ownership is almost irrelevant. The fact remains that returning this dog to Mr. Hansen's custody would constitute continued abuse." Derek's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, you can't." "I can and I will." "Sit down, counselor." Judge Brennan's voice was steel. "Mr. Hansen, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone in this courtroom before. 2 years ago, my daughter died. She was 23. Depression. She had a service dog, a golden retriever named Sonny. After she died, my ex-husband insisted we rehome Sonny. He had the ownership papers, so Sonny went to another family." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white, gripping the gavel. "I think about that dog every day. Wonder if he's waiting for her. Wonder if we betrayed him by sending him away. I let the law override my heart, and I regret it every single day." She looked directly at Derek. "I won't make that mistake again." She raised her gavel. This court rules as follows. Mr. Hansen's ownership rights are terminated on grounds of abuse and neglect. Custody of the dog Atlas, formerly K9 Rex, is granted to Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Furthermore, Mr. Hansen is permanently barred from owning or training animals. This dog has served his country. He's earned his retirement, and he's earned his family. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted. Emma's scream of joy was swallowed by the chaos of the courtroom. People were on their feet, some cheering, some crying, a few shouting protests that were quickly drowned out. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process that they'd actually won. Atlas was theirs. Legally, officially, permanently theirs. Emma threw her arms around Atlas's neck, sobbing into his fur. The dog stood perfectly still, letting her hold him, his tail wagging so hard his entire body swayed. Then he turned and licked the tears from her face with gentle precision, the way he'd learned to do over the past 2 months whenever Emma cried. Jennifer was hugging Sarah, laughing and crying simultaneously. "We did it. My God, we actually did it." Maggie stood with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Sarah saw her lips moving and recognized the shape of prayer, thanking a God Maggie had questioned since her son's death, but had never quite abandoned. Across the courtroom, Derek Hansen sat motionless. His lawyer was speaking urgently to him, probably about appeals and next steps, but Derek wasn't listening. He was staring at Atlas with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read: loss, regret, something that might have been relief. Judge Brennan was still speaking, her gavel striking repeatedly to restore order. "Furthermore, this court recommends that Mr. Hansen receive mandatory psychological evaluation and PTSD treatment. The pattern of behavior documented here suggests untreated trauma requiring professional intervention. Mr. Hansen, you're a veteran. You've served honorably, but you need help, and I'm ordering you to get it." Derek finally looked up at the judge. For a moment, Sarah thought he might argue, might explode with the rage she'd seen simmering beneath his surface. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, like a man waking from a long nightmare. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to Sarah. Can I say something to the dog, just for a minute?" Every instinct Sarah had screamed to say no, to get Emma and Atlas out of there immediately, to not give this man one more second near the animal he'd tortured. But something in Derek's voice, something broken and genuine, made her hesitate. Judge Brennan looked at Sarah. "It's your decision, Dr. Mitchell." Sarah looked at Emma, who was still holding Atlas. Her daughter's face was a mixture of fear and something else. A child's instinctive understanding that sometimes people needed grace even when they didn't deserve it. "Okay," Sarah said, "but I'm right here. We're all right here." Derek approached slowly, and Atlas tensed. The growl started low in his chest, but Emma kept her hand on his head, kept whispering, "It's okay. You're safe. I'm here." And gradually Atlas stopped growling. He didn't relax, but he didn't flee either. Derek knelt about 5 feet away, not coming closer. "Hey, Rex, Atlas, whatever your name is now," his voice cracked. "I'm not going to touch you. I know you don't want that. I need to say some things." The courtroom had gone silent again, everyone watching this strange, painful moment. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did. But I need to say it anyway." Derek's hands were shaking. "When I bought you, I thought I could save you. Thought I could save both of us. Because if I could make you perfect again, it would mean Mason's death wasn't for nothing. It would mean I wasn't worthless for surviving when he didn't." He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. "But you kept failing those tests, kept being scared, kept not being what I needed you to be. And I got angry, angrier than I've ever been in my life, because every time you failed it felt like Mason dying all over again. Like the universe telling me that nothing I do matters, that everyone I touch turns to shit. Mr. Hanson, I don't think—" Jennifer started, but Judge Brennan raised her hand. "Let him finish." Derek looked at Atlas directly. "You were never the problem. I was. I took my pain, and I put it on you. I became the kind of person I used to hate. The kind who hurts things weaker than them because they can't hurt the things that actually hurt them. And you, God, you took it. You took everything I did and you still tried. Even when I hit you, even when I starved you, even when I used that goddamn prod, you still tried to please me, because that's what you were trained to do. That's who you are." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You're a better soldier than I ever was. Mason would have loved you. Marcus, Lieutenant Mitchell. He did love you, and they'd both be ashamed of what I did to you." He stood slowly, wiping his face roughly. "You're going to have a good life now. With people who actually deserve you, and I'm going to get help. Going to try to become the kind of person who doesn't hurt things to feel better. I don't know if I can do it, but I'm going to try." He looked at Sarah. "Take care of him, please. He deserves everything good." Then Derek Hanson walked out of the courtroom, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His lawyer scrambled to follow, papers spilling from his briefcase. In the silence that followed, Emma spoke up. "Mom, is he going to be okay?" Sarah didn't know how to answer that. How to explain to an 8-year-old that some people carried wounds that never quite healed, that Derek might spend the rest of his life fighting the darkness that had consumed him. But Maggie answered instead. "I don't know, sweetheart, but at least now he has a chance. And that's more than he had before." The reporters were waiting outside, cameras and microphones creating a gauntlet to the parking lot. Jennifer and Sheriff Bradley formed a protective barrier while Sarah carried the paperwork that made Atlas officially hers. The questions came rapid fire. "Dr. Mitchell, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think this will set a precedent for animal rights cases? What message does this send about PTSD and veteran care?" Sarah stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, Emma and Atlas beside her, and faced the cameras. Jennifer looked worried. She'd advised against statements. But Sarah needed to say something. "I'm not a lawyer or a politician. I can't speak to precedents or legal implications. I can only tell you what I know. Atlas is a hero. He served our country with honor. He saved lives. And after his service, he was failed by every system that should have protected him. But today, justice was served. Not because the law is perfect, but because one judge chose compassion over technicality." She paused, looking down at Atlas, who was leaning against Emma's legs. "Derek Hanson is not a monster. He's a wounded veteran who didn't get the help he needed, and that wound spread to an innocent animal. I hope he gets the treatment Judge Brennan ordered. I hope he heals, but I also hope this case shows people that animal abuse isn't just a property issue. These are living beings who feel pain and fear and love. They deserve better than we've given them. A reporter called out, "What happens now?" Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Now we go home, and Atlas gets to just be a dog. No more missions, no more fighting, just a family and a warm bed and all the love he can handle. They drove home through Montana snow that had finally stopped falling, the afternoon sun breaking through clouds for the first time in days. Emma sat in the back with Atlas, both of them asleep by the time they reached Evergreen. Maggie dozed in the passenger seat. And Sarah drove with hands that no longer shook, tears that were finally happy, and a heart that felt full for the first time since James died. The town had decorated. When they pulled into the clinic parking lot, a banner stretched across the entrance. "Welcome home, Atlas." Neighbors lined the street, applauding. Linda Parsons stood on the porch with a casserole, because this was Montana, and good news required food. Children held signs with crayon drawings of German shepherds. Emma woke up and gasped. "Mom, look!" Atlas stirred, looking around at the crowd with cautious confusion. But then Emma opened the door, and suddenly he was surrounded by gentle hands, soft voices, by love made tangible, and slowly his tail began to wag. They spent the evening in celebration, the clinic filled with neighbors bringing food, sharing stories, making plans. Someone had started a petition to rename the park Atlas Park in his honor. Someone else suggested a memorial for military working dogs. The GoFundMe surplus, almost $40,000 after legal fees, would fund a new program, Second Chances Rescue, dedicated to rehoming retired working dogs. Maggie would run it, Linda would volunteer, and Sarah would provide veterinary care. They'd already identified 12 dogs who needed placement, who were languishing in facilities that didn't understand their needs. "Atlas started something," Jennifer said, watching the dog navigate the crowd with increasing confidence. "People are paying attention now to how we treat these animals, to how we treat veterans, to how trauma spreads when we don't address it." "One dog at a time," Sarah said. "That's all we can do." Sometimes one is enough. Later, after everyone had left and the clinic was quiet again, Sarah sat on the floor of Emma's room. Her daughter was in bed, finally, after hours of excitement. Atlas lay on the rug beside her, his paw stretched out to touch Emma's dangling hand, just like he'd done every night for weeks, anchoring her, protecting her, loving her in the way only dogs could, completely, unconditionally, without hesitation or doubt. "Mom?" Emma's voice was sleepy. "Did we save Atlas? Or did he save us?" Sarah thought about the past 2 months, about how fighting for Atlas had pulled her out of the isolated grief she'd been drowning in, about how Emma had found her voice again, her strength, her ability to trust, about how Maggie had rediscovered purpose, about how an entire community had come together around the simple idea that kindness mattered. "Both, baby. We saved each other. That's what families do, right?" "Yeah, sweetheart. That's exactly what families do." Emma's breathing deepened into sleep. Atlas shifted slightly, adjusting his position to better watch over her. His eyes met Sarah's in the dim light, and she saw in them a peace that had been missing before. The fear had faded. The trauma would always be there. Trauma didn't just disappear, but it no longer controlled him. Sarah reached over and gently scratched behind his ear. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for reminding us that broken things can heal." Atlas's tail thumped softly against the floor. Downstairs, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Robert Hayes. "Heard the news? Marcus would be so damn proud. Take care of his boy. Sarah sent back a photo. Emma and Atlas sleeping, the dog's head resting protectively near the child's shoulder. Caption: "He's home now. Finally home." She looked at the framed photo on Emma's nightstand, James in his uniform, smiling that smile that had first made her fall in love with him. She touched the glass gently. "We kept your promise," she told him. "Emma has her dog. The dog you loved. He's going to protect her and love her and be the friend she needed. You'd love who he's become, who we've all become." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle this time, the kind that made the world look clean and new. Atlas's paws twitched, chasing something in his dreams. Not running from something this time, Sarah thought. Running towards something, maybe running through snow with Emma, maybe running through memories of better times with James. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was running free. Sarah turned off the light and left the door cracked open. Emma's preference, Atlas's requirement. She went downstairs to find Maggie making tea in the kitchen, moving through the space with the comfortable familiarity of family. "Couldn't sleep?" Maggie asked. "Too happy to sleep. Is that a thing?" "After the year we've had, absolutely a thing." Maggie poured 2 cups. "I've been thinking about David, about Marcus, about Mason. All those boys and their dogs doing their duty, believing they'd come home. Most didn't. But Rex did. Atlas did. And maybe that's their legacy. That one good thing came home. One good thing survived. One good thing got the happy ending they all deserved. Do you think they know, David and James? Do you think they know we saved him?" Maggie smiled. "I think they've known all along. I think they've been nudging him this direction for 4 years. How else do you explain a dog traveling over 200 miles in winter to end up under your specific truck on Christmas Eve? That's not accident. That's divine intervention with a side of stubbornness." Sarah laughed, surprised at how easy it felt. Divine intervention with a side of stubbornness. That should be Atlas's motto. They drank their tea in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd found each other through shared loss and built something like family from the wreckage. At midnight, Sarah finally went to bed. But before sleep took her, she heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Atlas appeared in her doorway, looking uncertain. He'd never come into her room before, had always stayed with Emma. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" Atlas walked to her bedside and sat, looking at her with those intelligent amber eyes. Then, very gently, he placed his head on the bed beside her hand. Permission asked. Trust offered. Sarah's throat tightened. "You want to stay here tonight?" The tail wagged. "Okay. Come on up." Atlas jumped onto the bed with surprising grace for such a large dog. He circled once, twice, then settled at the foot of the bed with a deep sigh. Within seconds, he was asleep, his breathing steady and calm. Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to him breathe, feeling the weight of him on the bed, solid, real, alive. This dog had been tortured, abandoned, left to die. He had every reason to hate humans, to never trust again. Instead, he'd chosen love, chosen hope, chosen to believe that goodness existed despite everything he'd endured. "You're going to teach us so much," she whispered to the sleeping dog, "about resilience, about forgiveness, about choosing hope, even when hope seems impossible." Atlas's ear twitched, but he didn't wake. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Evergreen in white. Tomorrow would bring challenges. There was still debt to pay, a clinic to run, a daughter to raise. But tonight, for the first time in 4 years, Sarah fell asleep without fear. Because broken things could heal, because families could be built from strangers and strays, because one dog, against impossible odds, had found his way home, and because sometimes when you're brave enough to open your heart again, love finds a way to fill it. Atlas had taught them that, and they would spend the rest of their lives proving he was right. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone new. They're about opening your heart again after loss has convinced you that caring hurts too much. Sarah thought she was saving a broken dog, but Atlas was saving a broken family. He reminded them that loyalty isn't just about staying. It's about choosing to trust again, even when trust has been shattered. Every gray muzzle, every patient eye, every gentle soul who survived hardship carries this same wisdom, that resilience isn't about forgetting pain, but about believing joy is still possible despite it. Atlas didn't just survive his nightmare, he chose to love the people who finally saw his worth. And isn't that what we all hope for? To be seen, to be valued, not for what we can do, but for who we are. To find our people before time runs out. Sarah learned that protecting your heart doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps you alone. The real courage is letting someone in, even when you know loss is inevitable. Because the alternative, a life without connection, without purpose, without something to wake up for, that's not safety. That's just a different kind of dying. Atlas chose life. So can we. What would you do if you found Atlas under your truck? Have you ever been given a second chance when you thought all hope was lost? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.